Welcome back. You're listening to Jason Lee Willis's Examining Christmas. Today's episode is Preparing the Way. In previous episodes, we looked at Mary and Joseph and the family. Today, we'll be looking at the other baby in the nativity scene, baby John. Perhaps one of the biggest influences in our modern perceptions of Christmas is the annual holiday greeting card our friends and neighbors send us each December. In those cards, we see artistic depictions of Mary and Joseph, angels, shepherds, wise men, and various types of farm animals that may or may not have been found in Israel. If not Christmas cards, then surely the ceramic or plastic portrayals of these figures in nativity scenes have locked things in mentally for us. The expanded scene might even include art involving Zacharias and Elizabeth, who is captured with various poses of freak out, because who wouldn't be losing it if Mary showed up with the Christ? But I can almost guarantee that you've never seen a picture of wee John the Baptist in the nativity story, have you? Yet there he was in the previous episode, thumping Elizabeth's womb as if to trumpet in the arrival of royalty. And when Jesus is born in Bethlehem, wee John is somewhere nearby in Judea with an "I told you so" look to all the other infants in the nursery. If John had awareness of the Christ prior to even being born, then why did it take him 30 years to finally declare, "Behold," at the River Jordan? It would be easy to just skip right over wee John and jump into the Mary and Joseph story. But both the written innuendo and the unwritten missing scenes about this important figure are just too fun to skip over. First, let's recap the massive bit of prophecy Gabriel dropped on Zacharias. Luke chapter 1, verse 16 reads, "And many of the children of Israel shall turn to the Lord their God, and he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias," or Elijah in other translations, "to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Wee John is going to be the man. You know, Elijah was awesome. John is going to be awesome. John and Elijah are both awesome. Awesome equals awesome. In the context of the Christmas story, this verse can easily get lost. Even in context of the baptism story, John the Baptist can come off as an eccentric, loud prophet. But after he dies, Jesus drops some very heavy algebraic equations to make his disciples and the readers rethink everything they knew about John. John is Elijah. Huh? We've had the luxury of 2,000 years of biblical scholarship, and this strange point is still as confusing as the day Jesus dropped it in on his disciples. And before that, when Gabriel dropped it on Zacharias. If you're like me, you still insist on there being rules for a world where God spoke the world into existence with words that can cause miracles to happen whenever he wants to dispense with his laws of physics. Rules. So, before we take a leap of faith into the J equals E theory, let's make sure we can agree on some basics. The penalty of sin is death, right? Adam and Eve brought sin into the world, Genesis 1:1. Adam and Eve eventually died because they sinned. Yep. All human beings that sin also bear the penalty of death. Okay. In the Old Testament, Satan made sure all humans fell short in the eyes of God. See the book of Job. Jesus had to come to earth as a mortal human. Jesus did not sin, and dying without sin atoned for our sin. These are some basic philosophies found in the Bible. Since Genesis, humans have died as a penalty for sinning. It's been a hard and fast rule since Adam and Eve, except for two people in the Old Testament, Enoch and Elijah. The Bible is fairly clear that these men did not experience death, but were taken to heaven. Even though human pride would lead us to believe we know a lot about what it means to go to heaven, none of us have a clue. Even enlightened men like Paul mention there being different parts to heaven. Thus, it is difficult to even understand what it means for Enoch and Elijah to be taken to heaven while still alive. Is there some special room for just the two of them? Are they in some sort of sub-heaven where they can exist while alive? Are they in the presence of God? Can a living human even exist in the presence of God? Are they in the presence of the souls of the dead? Were there even human souls in heaven yet, or were they in Sheol prior to Jesus living and dying on earth? Is this fair? No. God was very clear that the penalty of sin is death. If Enoch or Elijah had managed to live a sinless life, then what is the need for Christ? No human beings besides Christ has been sinless. Despite being righteous men, far better than any of us, these two men still had to have sinned. God did not take these men from earth because they were sinless. God did not spare these men because he loved them more than he loves us. These men might have been taken to heaven, but it does not mean that God spared them death. He just postponed their death dates. All sinners owe God a death. Enoch and Elijah were not perfect, but God had a plan for them. They were special, but not so special that they were above death. Disclosure. At this point, I will shamelessly pitch a sequel I have in the works, examining the end times. I cannot get into my Enoch theories here, or I'll never get back to the prayer of Mary, which is pretty cool. Unlike Enoch, there are many stories about Elijah. By looking only at the Old Testament, it would be pretty easy to match Elijah with Enoch as the second witness in the book of Revelation. Spoiler, Enoch is yes, Elijah is no. In Revelation chapter 11, verse 5, it tells that the two witnesses will be able to send fire from their mouth to consume anyone trying to harm them. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 38, Elijah called fires of God to defeat his enemies. In fact, there are not many prophets that can rival the power of this mighty man. Let's review Elijah's feats. 1 Kings 17, verses 1 through 8, Elijah proclaims a drought. 1 Kings 17, 8 through 16, miraculous replenishing of food. 1 Kings 17, 17 through 24, Elijah asks God to restore the life to a boy. 1 Kings chapter 18, Elijah slaughters the priests of Baal. 1 Kings 19, Elijah eats a cake made by the angel of the Lord. 1 Kings 19, Elijah visits Mount Horeb or Sinai and stays in the same cave as Moses. 1 Kings 20 through 22, Elijah warns the wicked. 2 Kings chapter 2, Elijah ascends to heaven. 2 Kings chapter 2, Elisha continues the fight. 2 Kings chapter 13, Elisha dies. Obviously, Elijah was a powerful man of God. He also was a killer. He killed men. Even though they were evil men, he still sinned and owes God a death. But what a candidate for the second witness. I certainly could be wrong about eliminating him from the list, though. Perhaps the most convincing factor in being a witness is his sojourn to Mount Horeb in chapter 19. Elijah did not view himself as perfect, and even asks for his death for being no better than his fathers. Then he has a visitor. Some think that the angel of the Lord is not just an ordinary angel, but the pre-incarnate Christ. Now that really qualifies him as a witness. He's been chosen by Christ himself. At this meeting with the angel of the Lord, he is given a cake. This angel cake sustained him on a walk to Mount Horeb, which is also known as Mount Sinai. This is the same mountain where Moses met with God and received the Ten Commandments. Whether Mount Horeb is Jabal Musa or Jabal Lawz, it is still a long walk without food or water for 40 days. This was special food. In fact, I believe it could have been manna. With this manna cake in his belly, Elijah was easily sustained on his walk. Once he got to Mount Horeb, he entered the sacred cave of God, where he conversed with the Almighty. In God's direct hotline, Elijah wrapped his mantle around his body to protect him from God's holy presence. Much later, Elijah took his apprentice Elisha with him to witness his ascension to heaven. A chariot of fire came down and took Elijah up to heaven. Elisha saw all of this, and told others. In fact, Elijah made such a lasting impact on the Jewish people that many years later, the prophet Malachi made a prophecy concerning the prophet. Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 reads, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse." Elijah wasn't going to stay in heaven. He was coming back. Now, many end times experts take the easy path and say all of this adds up to Elijah as the second witness. This verse from Malachi almost seals the deal. Almost. To us, the great and dreadful day of the Lord sounds like Revelations. To Malachi, this also could have meant the coming of Christ as a man. But Jesus didn't want to smite the earth, right? He came to save it. However, think of the lesson of the fig tree during Easter week, Mark chapter 11, 12 through 26. The fig tree equals Jerusalem, the Judea, the whole world. If there weren't people worthy of dying for, Jesus could have cursed the entire world just as easily as he cursed the fig tree. Fate and free will make my head hurt. The Elijah mission, a Jason Lee Willis paraphrase. God saw a pretty intense servant in Elijah, and without the suspension of any rules, which he had the authority to suspend if he wanted, he chose to suspend the death of Elijah by sending down a flaming chariot to bring him to heaven. The purpose of suspending the death sentence is for him to spend a few centuries in heaven reading the Let's Save Humanity playbook, and right before Jesus would come to earth, Elijah would be sent down to earth to provide an intense training session so that at least one person, remember Noah, would be worthy and ready to receive the direct training from Jesus. Isn't that what Malachi promised? Just like all the Christ prophecies were not exactly how the Pharisees imagined, so too was the Elijah prophecy much stranger than even Zacharias might have imagined. I'm sure Zacharias expected the window of heaven to open back up, and then for the flaming chariot to do a maverick-like flyby, Top Gun reference, of the temple of Jerusalem while shouting out pithy phrases worthy of Santa Claus. Instead, Gabriel told him Elijah was coming back in wee John. "But that's impossible," said the Hebrews after each and every absurdly powerful miracle they witnessed. Okay. I'll try to give you some precedent and rules. Check out 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 9. In this verse, Elisha asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. What? Elisha knew his mentor was leaving. He would now be the lead man in the fight against evil. He probably worried he didn't have enough power to sustain the cause. But rather than simply asking for his own strength as Joshua had after Moses left, Elisha asked for Elijah's spirit. What does that mean? Okay, we don't even understand how our own soul works, so we definitely do not understand how Elijah's powerful soul worked. But the request is granted. Elisha isn't even sure if it is possible or if it'll work. But as soon as Elijah goes to heaven, something does happen. He gets a part of Elijah's spirit. It would be easier to just think that Elisha was given more power by the Holy Spirit or God, but that is not how the scene is described. From that moment, the mantle fell on him. Elisha was more than he once was. Perhaps the easiest way to understand this could be from a classic piece of pop culture. Just as Obi-Wan Kenobi guided Luke Skywalker in spirit, perhaps part of Elijah's soul guided Elisha. Or perhaps it is even more explicit than that. What if Elijah could divide his soul? Perhaps part of his soul continued to exist with his physical body in heaven, while the other part of his soul stayed with Elisha. Isn't that what this scene describes? Who are we to know what God can or can't do? Even Elijah wasn't sure this could happen, but it seems that it did. Now, from this moment, Elisha really started to act like Elijah too. He divided the River Jordan just as he'd done earlier. He healed. He struck wicked youths dead out of anger. He raised a child from death. Now, I do not believe Elijah possessed Elisha and took him over. But what if two spirits can inhabit a human body? It works for demons. Why not for good guys? When Elisha dies in chapter 13, things are still not normal. When a dead man incidentally touched the bones of Elisha, he was brought back to life. So, one thing is clear. Elisha died. So what happened to the spirit of Elijah? The rest of his spirit was still in heaven with his body. Did he half die? Can such a thing be so? One thing is indisputable. Elijah was coming back. Malachi knew this, but how? No one had ever come back before. Enoch hadn't. What was going to happen to Elijah? The Jews probably expected thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening, and earthquakes when Elijah returned. According to Jesus himself, everyone missed it. How did we miss that? It doesn't say anything about Elijah in the New Testament, does it? We're right back in the Christmas story, aren't we? Let's get this straight. According to Gabriel, we, John, will have a direct connection to the verse from Malachi. We, John, will fulfill Malachi. Could it be that the child will be given the second half of Elijah, just like Elisha had been given the first half? As far as the Christmas story goes, wee John vanishes from reference and imagination right after that womb kick he gave Elizabeth. But wee John grew up to be John the Baptist. In this manner, he definitely fulfilled the prophecy of preparing the way for Christ. Unlike Christ, the Jews warmly embraced the preaching of John and quickly embraced him as a prophet of God. While we do not have any stories of his childhood, we do know that he shared many similarities with Elijah that did not go unnoticed by the leaders of the church. He dressed in animal skins like Elijah. He ate locusts and honey like Elijah. He inspired fear and awe like Elijah. He openly condemned the kings of Judea like Elijah. He knew he'd been sent to prepare the way for Christ. If I was a lawyer, I would have declared, "I have no further questions, Your Honor," and then sat down with a wry look to the other attorney. But then the other attorney, the Pharisees, would destroy my entire case with John chapter 1, verse 19. This is what it says. And this is the record of John. When the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who art thou?" And he confessed and denied not, but confessed, I am not the Christ. And they asked him, What then? Art thou Elias or Elijah? And he saith, I am not. Art thou that prophet? And he answered, No. Well, I guess that wraps it up. John denied it. He said he is not Elijah. Unfortunately, John probably had some very good reason for saying this. What if he had said he was Elijah? The country would have exploded with a faux religious fervor. No one would have listened to his preparation. John's mission was to prepare the way. Answering yes would have undone that message. However, even though he says no twice, look what he says a few verses later in verse 22. Then they said unto him, Who art thou? That we may give an answer to them that sent us. What sayest thou of thyself? He said, I am the voice of the one crying out in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, as said the prophet Isaiah. What kind of answer is that? No, yes. Oh boy. Okay, who blew up the Death Star in Star Wars? Luke Skywalker. Or was it Obi-Wan Kenobi? Luke pushed the trigger, but if not for Obi-Wan Kenobi being there every step of the way and convincing Luke to trust the Force, Luke would have failed. So John's answer is, I'm John, and I'm the Elijah prophecy. I'm John the Elijah. If you're a little unconvinced, so too were the Pharisees, who thought they had their man. Later, it was Jesus that explained things better. Before we get to that, let's back up to John the Baptist's second interaction with Jesus the Christ. Aside from the womb kick, I do not know if John the Elijah saw Jesus again for another 30 years. All four gospel writers take time to give John the Elijah a proper introduction. We learn he is the son of Zacharias, but we already knew that. Oh, and his style? Yep, we already knew that. There's a line that I find curious. John preached in the wilderness. The quickest assumption is to call the River Jordan the wilderness, because that is where we see him when he baptizes Jesus. Geographically, this is the heart of old Israel. Heck, Galilee is more of a distant wilderness than the River Jordan. The Jordan River is about 20 miles from Jerusalem, a city where 1 million people can gather during a given festival. This is not wilderness, even if it is rocky. Do you know what the wilderness could be? The Arabian Desert between Judea and Parthia, or modern-day Iraq. Now that is a wilderness. With this logic, I could argue the Gobi Desert is the wilderness too. But let me turn a corner to why I think it is important. Did the Jews once live in Babylon for a generation or two? Where do the Magi see the star? Where do scholars think Magi are from? Yes, I think there is some loose support for there being a devout fan base of all things Christ-related in Parthia, or ancient Babylon. But after the dispersion, there are Jewish communities in a lot of places besides Judea, right? That could be important. We're going to go back to Christmas Story for a bit, but preview the events of later chapters, including Herod. Cue the Darth Vader Imperial March, but I won't because of copyright. Even though we don't hear anything from John the Baptist again, he had to have been a 6-month-old baby when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. He was also a 7-month-old baby when Jesus was brought to the temple to be passed around by some really old people. And when the wise men showed up, he must have been around during that time also. At some point, Herod loses it and decides the only course of action is to kill every baby in Bethlehem. Think about the evil willpower to do something like that. If he is willing to kill every baby in Bethlehem, would there be any baby from a newborn to the age of 2 that would be safe? Wee John is in grave danger. Later, we will discuss the house where Mary and Joseph stay prior to bringing Jesus to the temple. This house is probably where they are staying when the Magi show up unexpectedly. Regardless of whose house this happens to be, wee John is also in a house very close to the one Jesus was staying at. If Herod kills the Christ, he wins. If Herod kills the Elijah prior to the preparation, he also wins. Okay, so maybe Herod doesn't have this on his radar. Maybe all the other 24 Cohen priests can keep a secret about wee John and mute Zacharias. Doubtful, but possible. While Mary, Joseph, and Jesus are getting out of Dodge en route to Egypt, Zacharias and Elizabeth also have an important decision. Is it safe to keep wee John, aka John the Baptist, in Judea? This is why I really like the idea of John growing up in distant Parthia. He had a ride, the Magi. He had an audience, the Babylonian Jews who stayed. He had a great academic learning center, Parthia. Plus, there is an entire legend from Mandaeism about John beginning his baptism ministry in Parthia. There is also a practical reason to want John in a distant wilderness. It takes 30 years for him to meet Jesus. Now remember, Jesus was buddies with Lazarus, a Judean from Bethany. This insinuates that during Jesus' approximate 90 trips to Judea during his life, he regularly met Lazarus. Yet, John the Baptist, who is a maternal biological relative of Jesus, didn't once meet Jesus before the day he sees him approach the river to be baptized? I think Luke chapter 3, verse 1 has the reason. John turns 30. I read a few articles that may or may not be credible that explained that at the age of 30, Hebrew men were able to preach and teach and read in the synagogue. Bar mitzvahs are a more recent custom. If John grew up and evangelized in Judea for 30 years, then why the sudden interest from the Pharisees? For the first 10 years of his life, it would have been dangerous to be identified as the son of Zacharias and to be the same age as the Christ. Even if Herod was dead, it would have been smart and safe for him to stay in Parthia. What would he have done in Parthia? Evangelized till he was blue in the face, to both Jew and Gentile. So by the time he reaches 30, worldly travelers would have been told the stories of this Christ-aged young prophet who could rip scripture like he was a prophet. John the Elijah would have gained fame prior to returning to his home when he reaches the age of 30. Just like before they were infants, John the Elijah has a 6-month head start before Jesus shows up. What does he do with this head start? The obvious answer is to say he called out the corruption in Judea. The best answer is that he took on 2 apprentices/disciples, Andrew, the son of Jonah, and John, the son of Zebedee. What happened after John the Baptist declared Jesus to be the Christ and baptized him? Having prepared the way, he handed over his prize pupils to become 2 of the 12 disciples that would spread Christianity to the entire world. If this guy really did live his life in the style of Elijah, then it makes sense that he lasts less than a calendar year in Judea before being arrested. Okay, are you ready to get back to the J equals E theory? John the Baptist once again recognized the Christ just by being in close proximity. After all, the Elijah part spent the better part of 5 centuries with him in heaven. So John the Baptist also knew that once Jesus knelt to be baptized, the mission was not over yet. If he was privy to the Let's Save Humanity playbook, then he knew Jesus had a bunch of prophecies to fulfill, which he asked about from his prison cell. Matthew 11, verse 7 reads, "And as they departed, Jesus began to say unto the multitudes concerning John, What went ye out in the wilderness to see? A reed shaken with the wind? But what went ye out for to see? A man clothed in soft raiment? Behold, they that wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. But what went ye out to see? A prophet? Yea, I say unto you, and more than a prophet. Behold, for this is he of whom it is written, Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare the way before thee. Verily, I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Notwithstanding, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you will receive it, this is Elijah, which was for to come. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear." John equals Elijah? Really? There we have it. Jesus tried his best to spell it out for us. John is more than a prophet. He is the fulfillment of prophecy. He is Elijah. Who do we believe, John or Jesus? Okay, I'll go with Jesus. Jesus didn't expect the people to get it. It is an abstract concept. This isn't the only place we have a connection between John the Baptist and Elijah. Matthew chapter 17 describes the transfiguration of Jesus on the mountain. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, the sons of Zebedee, to the high mountain. On the mountain, Moses and Elijah appeared to Jesus. First, I'd like to remind everybody in this courtroom that Moses is officially dead. So, what about Elijah? Coincidentally, John the Baptist had just been executed. If part of his soul had died with Elisha, and part of his soul died with John the Baptist, it seems Elijah had given God his death twice. That's awesome. That is why Elijah was now able to meet with Jesus. This wasn't John the Baptist because Jesus hardly knew that man. Jesus did know Elijah from Elijah's time in heaven. They both went down about the same time. They shared and understood the mission. Heading into his darkest hour, Jesus needed advice and inspiration from both Moses and Elijah. Seeing Elijah, the disciples wondered if the Malachi prophecy had been wrong. They knew the Son of God was Jesus. They also, somehow, recognized Elijah. Did Jesus greet them? Name tags? Divine obviousness? But they knew Elijah was supposed to return prior to the Messiah. Well, the Messiah had come, and they hadn't seen Elijah return to earth in physical form. John and Elijah must not have looked alike. Jesus explains this in Matthew 17, verse 10. It reads, "And his disciples asked him, saying, Why then say the scribes that Elijah must come first? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elijah truly shall come and restore all things. But I say unto you, that Elijah is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood he spoke unto them of John the Baptist. Elijah had come already? He came as John the Baptist. No one understood. We can clearly see that John was Elijah when Jesus said that they did to Elijah whatever they wished. John the Baptist was beheaded by his own people. When on earth, Elijah was not killed by anyone. Jesus said he'd likewise suffer like Elijah suffered. Elijah had died with John the Baptist. Jesus knew John and Elijah were one and the same. Disclaimer. I will continue to argue this point during a future discussion of the two witnesses of Revelation in my future publication examining the end times. Spoiler, Moses equals no. Elijah equals no. Enoch equals yes. For witness number 2, you will have to buy the book when it comes out. Now, where were we? Yes. Mary, barely a week pregnant, just walked all the way down from Nazareth and barged into the house of Zacharias, where she met Elizabeth, 6 months pregnant, with a very unique baby. You've been listening to Jason Lee Willis's podcast series, Examining Christmas. The music you've heard is from YouTube's audio library. I hope you can join me again for episode 7, Songs and Blessings. Until we meet again.